The Salvation Army claims it's decided to stop running some city shelters in Denver. The city says what actually happened was that the Salvation Army was told its services are no longer needed.
Victory lap I will be doing, absolutely. It's a win for community.
We'll take you inside the crowded dance in the air over Colorado's wildfires. Those fires forced some quick fishing to relocate trout before they got steamed. A program's organizers say they have made a breakthrough in stopping youth violence, right as their funding may be cut.
We truly know what works to prevent violence.
That's tonight on Next. The Salvation Army's relationship with Denver's leaders may be beyond saving. After months of controversy about issues at their shelters, today that nonprofit put out a misleading statement saying it's made the difficult decision to no longer operate 3 of the Denver city shelters. The city says the decision was actually made for the Salvation Army when it failed to win contracts to keep running the shelters. Here's Marshall Zellinger.
The Tamarack Shelter in southeast Denver, the Aspen, formerly the Doubletree in Central Park, and Stone Creek, the former Best Western near Northfield, all 3 are Denver shelters operated by the Salvation Army. And like a head coaching candidate who takes their name out of the running after being told they were not going to get the job, the Salvation Army told Denver City Council members today it would no longer manage those 3 shelters next year.
There are 3 shelters that are currently running that were in the RFP process, which is a fancy way of saying you're applying for the job of running the shelters. They bid on 2 of the 3. Ultimately, they were not selected to move forward.
John Ewing, spokesperson for Denver Mayor Mike Johnston, confirmed that the Salvation Army applied and was not selected. The mayor and city council had concerns earlier this year about who else could handle shelters at this scale. Ewing could not say yet who has been picked to operate the shelters next year.
I can't tell you who won it. I can only tell you that in this case, because the Salvation Army disclosed it, who did not.
Victory lap I will be doing, absolutely. It's a win for community.
The 2 North Denver shelters are in City Council member Chantel Lewis's district, and she has been a vocal critic following multiple shootings at the former Doubletree location and after an employee at that shelter was accused of sexual assault.
For me, it's actually not a surprise that the Salvation Army is maybe not moving forward because we now have metrics in place to hold you accountable to the outcomes versus just being able to collect money and have bad outcomes in poor environments.
The most recent incident at a Salvation Army operated shelter was last month when an 11-year-old girl at the Tamarack shelter was injured falling from an unprotected top floor window ledge. We have reported extensively on that, leading a spokesperson with the Salvation Army to refuse our interview request today, at least with me. In a phone conversation, spokesperson Jennifer Forker told me, "We are not going to be providing an interview to 9 News. You will just have to cobble together your shock jock. You can send someone else to do the story, and that will be serviceable." In their letter to city council members, the Salvation Army wrote, the decision was also due to substantial and ongoing financial strain, and that it absorbed more than $5.2 million in operating costs. I asked John Ewing from the city if the Salvation Army has been reimbursed for every expense requested. He said there's a set dollar amount to be reimbursed in the contract, and he told me the Salvation Army has not yet spent all the dollars remaining for this year.
Things happen all the time between government service providers and the changing leadership of municipalities and that kind of thing. But this has been a pretty wild flame out between the city and Salvation Army over the last years.
I mean, there's lessons on both sides. We've been critical of the city and how they've been starting up the shelters and how much money that has cost. And then you've got this organization with the Salvation Army operating it, being the first operator for the city of Denver, clearly growing pains on both ends for the first year and a half of this.
Absolutely bonkers for them to spin it as we have made a decision to stop operating the shelters if in fact the city is telling the truth and they simply lost the process. That's
as though we wouldn't be able to find that out.
Right? Eventually it's going to be on paper somewhere. All right, Marshall, thank you. A watchdog report says Veterans Affairs hospitals in Colorado and across the country are seeing more severe staffing shortages this year. The Trump administration is currently moving ahead with plans to eliminate 30,000 jobs by the end of September. This week, the VA's Office of Inspector General released a report surveying 139 medical centers. According to the report, every one reported staffing issues, both medical and non-medical staff. Now, staffing shortages are not new for the VA, but according to this report, the latest results show a 50% increase in the severe staffing shortages compared to last year. This report says the VA Medical Center in Aurora reported severe staffing shortages among 45 job groups, including doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, and records technicians. And the hospital in Grand Junction said they're facing severe shortages across 22 roles. The Trump administration dismissed the watchdog report, said it was unreliable, said it was subjective. Spokesperson for the VA said their vacancy rate for doctors and nurses is in line with their historic averages. One of the largest fires in state history continues to grow in northwest Colorado. Overnight mapping showed the perimeter was not as contained as firefighters previously thought. The Leaf Fire has burned more than 127,000 acres in Rio Blanco and Garfield counties. It is just 3% contained. It is a super hot and dry area right now. Firefighters have described active and extreme fire behavior on the ground for more than a week now. The Leaf Fire currently stands as the 5th largest in state history. Crews have been having a much easier time with the Elk Fire nearby. That's 14,000 acres, 75% contained. And the governor's declared a disaster emergency for the Croshow Fire, which is to the northeast of those two other larger fires. Croshow Fires burned around 1,700 acres, began Monday in Rio Blanco County, has since gone east into Trout County, and has led to some evacuations there. Those are just two, or three rather, of a number of the fires burning in western Colorado. The skies are beginning to get crowded as dozens of helicopters and airplanes help firefighters work in tough terrain. Our Evan Krugel spoke with one of the pilots.
From the ground on the western slope, Colorado's famous blue skies are tough to see right now. But above the smoke sits a flurry of activity. See those colored lines? Every single one is the flight path of a different airplane or helicopter on Tuesday, attacking fires below.
I've never personally seen this many airplanes in Colorado.
Don Jorgensen is one of those pilots. And the blue line is his, showing loop after loop south of Grand Junction as he dropped slurry on the Turner Gulch fire.
It is really neat to see, especially from the air watching the others drop.
Don says this amount of air traffic requires coordination.
Usually there's an air attack in the sky that's telling us where they want us to drop. They're in communication with the guys on the ground. Typically you wouldn't see this many airplanes or helicopters in the region.
One reason could be a lack of other large fires in neighboring states, allowing more federal resources to assist on fires like the Lee Fire.
There's got to be at least six seats, 15 heavies, couple VLATs, couple scoopers.
Don lives in Fort Morgan, but is planning to be deployed in Grand Junction for the next few months. Thankfully, he has plenty of friends to catch up with once they all land.
You get on the ground, you talk to other people that are flying it, and it's neat to hear their stories and what they saw and how they were able to save a house coming through. That's why I do it.
Today we learned the Air Force is even getting involved now, using a modified C-130 to drop slurry on the fire. In total, 41 aircraft are now in the region. That includes 14 air tankers and, Kyle, 26 helicopters.
That really is remarkable. I mean, I think, and one thing that you don't realize is just all the coordination that goes into it. And unless you've actually gone out and watched one of these firefights as a firefighter, as a community member, as a journalist, when we get sent out, you watch this very coordinated dance, and it truly is spectacular to see.
Yeah, it really looks like ballet in the sky, and then you see it on paper with those graphic maps really showing that coordinated visual effort to fight these fires. It really is something else, seeing dozens of different apparatus working at once.
All right, Evan Krugel, glad we wore the matching suits today as well. Thank you for that report. A federal judge has dismissed a lawsuit against Jefferson County schools brought over a conservative culture war issue these days, trans kids. The lawsuit was brought by 4 families represented by the conservative legal group Alliance Defending Freedom. They argued it was their right to direct the upbringing and education of their children in line with their religion, and that Jeffco's policies would force their students to share bedrooms and bathrooms with trans kids on field trips. The district argued that any one of those families could request alternative accommodations for their students on a trip for any reason, including their religious beliefs. Last week, a federal judge ruled that parents do have the right to teach their children certain values at home, but, quote, they have no right to dictate Jeffco's efforts to ensure transgender students are part of an education environment where all students feel safe and ready to learn. Jeffco's policy is still under scrutiny. The Trump administration's Justice Department opened an investigation into the policy earlier this year. If it feels like we're always talking about fires in Colorado, we certainly have been lately. It has been a record-breaking month for fire weather. Biologists go on a rescue mission evacuating hundreds of trout from a coming fire.
There's been a lot of death going on due to youth gun violence.
A project in Denver says it is making real headway against youth violence, and losing federal funding could cut that progress short. That's next. It was back in 2002 when Governor Bill Owens caused a bit of a public relations and tourism panic in this state when he said of the wildfires that year, "It looks as if all of Colorado is burning." The whole state, of course, was not on fire and wanted to get that message out, but the national headline had already been written. Today, no similar panic, as Governor Jared Polis, much more low-key, declared a disaster emergency for all of Colorado due to the historic fire activity. So far this month, there have been 21 fire weather warnings, also known as red flag warnings. That's the most on record, ahead of 2023 and 2012. They both had 15 warnings for the month. We're only halfway through this month, however. Low relative humidity, strong winds, and dry vegetation are the main issues that are contributing to those red flag warnings. The governor's disaster declaration adds an additional $2.5 million to the state's wildfire response fund to bring in extra resources for firefighters. The Stoner Mesa fire. Haven't talked much about that, but it's still burning uncontained in the San Juan National Forest. It's burned more than 7,000 acres and has put the town of Rico on notice to evacuate. Earlier this week, Parks and Wildlife workers carried out some evacuations of their own. They hauled hundreds of native trout out of the fire's path. On Monday, state, local, and federal workers went on a high-stakes fishing trip. It allowed aquatic biologists to access Wildcat Creek, a tributary that feeds into the Upper Dolores. That creek is home to a unique strain of cutthroat trout, the Uncompahgre cutthroat. They're recognized as the native strain in the Upper Dolores, Gunnison, and Colorado River basins, kind of like the OG trout in that part of our state. Parks and Wildlife workers say they're an important population to preserve the genetic diversity, so they wanted to quick get these fish out of the way before the fire reached the watershed and impacted the air and water quality.
Those fish, having evolved in the drainage, have certain characteristics that make them successful in that environment. So we have these very small populations that could potentially blink out from the genetic side of things. There's a lot more than just, oh, it's one fish in one stream. You could actually use the genetics of that fish and kind of plant it in other unique lineages within the basin to improve genetic diversity and improve the survival of that entire lineage in the Upper Dolores River Basin.
There's a beautiful trout, and that man has a majestic mustache. CPW and Forest Service workers fished 266 of the trout out of the creek. They've trucked them 165 miles away to a hatchery north of Gunnison. The hope is that they will eventually return them from the hatchery to that same Wildcat Creek. If it turns out that's not an option, CPW says they could establish a new population somewhere else.
Another hot, hazy summer day in Colorado, but not in record territory at 96 degrees at the airport. Triple-digit highs to the south and to the north, Fort Collins down to Lamar and around Grand Junction and out toward the Moab area. But the cloud cover has actually brought temperatures down, and some of these clouds are offering rain out on the eastern plains. Current readings have also cooled with the cloud cover, 87 degrees in downtown Denver. But the wind, dry microburst thunderstorms creating wind gusts to 20, 30, even 40 miles per hour. Fire managers kept on their toes by high-based storms with wind and lightning over western Colorado, dealing with a fire weather warning for at least half the state. And there's a lot of cloud cover out there, but today finally some action on the radar. We're seeing some rain from these storms as they track up the Fort Morgan corridor up toward the Sterling area. Denver's missed out on the rain, but there's actually a severe storm down in the Crowley County area and also Kiowa. That one might have a little bit of hail in it. Tonight in Denver, temperatures stay in the 80s until about 10 o'clock tonight, then drop into the 70s. We have a cooler day coming up by the time we get to Saturday. We'll look for a 30% chance of rain from storms, and then temperatures coming down a bit, but not much moisture to work with heading into early next week.
Some of you have written in concerned about meteorologist Corey Reppenhagen in recent months. concerned that our resident storm chaser has been confined to this TV studio too often instead of being out in the elements where that man belongs. Well, friends, good news. Corey is headed back to his two usual beats, the storm chasing beat and what we call the weather beat.
Corey Reppenhagen is on the weather beat.
Time tied to a tie, starting to break from the vines. Healthy habitat.
That was Corey Reppenhagen on the weather beat.
You thought we were done with that, didn't you? You thought that was over. It's not over. No. We're just getting started with that man. Coming up, a community youth initiative is celebrating big wins in Denver, and they worry their project is about to be pulled out from under them.
This is not a time to be cutting back on funding. This is a time to be pouring into our communities.
Can they convince the federal government? That's next. Youth violence tears apart families and whole communities. There's a program at the University of Colorado Boulder working to reduce that violence. They say it's working. The risk now is a funding cut.
There's been a lot of death going on due to youth gun violence.
We truly know what works to prevent violence. And we know that violence is devastating in our communities. I'm Beverly Kingston, and I direct the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence at the University of Colorado Boulder. When we're talking about firearm violence, homicide, suicides, the devastating ripple effects are horrific.
Because it's personal to me. My name is Quavon Mosley, and I lost a couple people to gun violence. I have my closest friend, I lost him to gun violence. And the pain that I go through, my family goes through, and their family goes through, I wouldn't want anybody to go through that.
For the last almost 15 years, we've had a grant that's funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
I'm actually going to a documentary screening later that I'm hosting. It's about gun violence prevention.
And what's being threatened to be cut is the final year of funds for this project. It's like we've got the fruit on the trees, just ripe like the Colorado peaches, and it's all going to die on the vine if we don't find additional funding sources.
So for them to cut our grant and our money, it's bringing a lot of stress, and we need to find another grant and more funding to keep doing the positive work that we're doing.
This is not a time to be cutting back on funding. This is a time to be pouring into our communities and pouring efforts into building infrastructures of what truly works.
We'll keep track of what happens with their funding. We are back with your feedback. Thank you, Marilyn. Next. Tonight's feedback is about last night's program when we found the latest danger rock jumping out in front of unsuspecting drivers. This one's in a strip mall parking lot at Mississippi and Potomac in Aurora.
They assume it's grass, and they just it, and then they figure out there's two big boulders in it.
This thing has been grabbing cars and trucks. We saw an ambulance that was high-centered on the rock. Feedback from Jennifer. Thank you for this story, Kyle. I don't know why, but I really needed it. Tess on Threads. The next logo bleep over her cussing was the funniest thing about this whole thing. Aurora writes in, if an inanimate object literally standing still, minding its business, completely destroys your life, maybe you weren't meant to make it. P on Blue Sky says some drivers are dumb as rocks. Others, it turns out, are dumber than rocks. See you next time.